Everyone, we've made it. The High Holy Day season is over, and we're now returning to our regularly scheduled programming. This week, we have scrolled the Torah back to the beginning and starting over now with the story of Genesis, creation of the world, also known as Maaseh Bereshit. The Torah, not just the story within it, but also the Torah itself, the scroll, is made with exquisite care. The writer, called the Sofer, has many rules to follow in order for the Torah to be kosher. The parchment has to be made from the skin of a kosher animal. There needs to be special ink used, a special quill. Some letters need to be bigger, some need to be smaller. There are sometimes in the Torah where the spacing changes, and there are so many more rules. And before they even begin to write it, the sofer, the scribe, usually goes to the mikveh to enter a state of ritual purification before beginning the Torah, which is a work that, by the way, usually takes a year, maybe even a little more. It's not easy to make a Torah, but you might think that with all the work that goes into making the Torah, as perfect as it can possibly be, you might think that by the time it got to us here on the Bima to read it, they could make it easier. Memorizing the passages is very difficult when you read from the Torah because there are no vowels and no punctuation marks. And I would love to say to the sofer, to the scribe, why? Why do you make it so hard when it is completely doable to put those marks in? But of course, that's not what our tradition says they should do, so I understand why they don't do it. As someone who teaches Hebrew school, my kids often ask me, why are there no punctuation marks? Why are there no vowels? And this is not the answer I give them, but what I would love to say is they do it because they want to stress us out when we read from the Torah. But that's actually not what I tell them, of course, because that's not the answer you want to give when your students ask you a question like that. So I tell them the answer that my bar mitzvah teacher taught me when I was training to read from the Torah for the first time. And that answer is that they don't expect us to read from the Torah perfectly. They don't expect us to memorize everything 100%, nor do they want us to get it 100%. They want us to try our best. People hesitate, they start over certain phrases, they make errors and they rush through it, hoping no one will notice all the time when they read the Torah. Not just kids, but adults too. It's not just acceptable lately in our day and age, it's become almost expected. Just like it's not truly a party, they say, at a Jewish home, until someone accidentally breaks a glass and we say, HaYam. I was taught that it's not truly a Torah reading until the reader makes at least one mistake. And that is going to happen a lot more easily without those vowels and punctuation marks, let me tell you that. I'm sure we've all heard this before, but it's okay to make mistakes. To make a mistake is to be human, and we are taught that only God is perfect. We're taught that HaShem is tzuri v'lo avlata bo. In English, the rock in whom there is no flaw. Whether or not you truly believe in God, some of us don't, the point remains that perfection is not attainable for us humans. And yet it seems that nevertheless, all the time, many of us try to be perfect. So often we expect too much of ourselves. We don't demand perfection sometimes, but we demand something so close to it. And some of us do even demand perfection. That pressure gets to your head. We're told to seek maximum closeness with Hashem. So if Hashem is perfect, then it stands to reason that we should try to be as perfect as we can be. But just how perfect is the most possible perfect human being? It's hard to say. All we know is that in theory, the most perfect human being is somewhere between totally imperfect and godly, 100% perfection. However perfect we become, we are short of Hashem. But what if Hashem was not truly a rock in whom there is no flaw or injustice? What if God wasn't perfect? It's a very radical question. Some might even say that it's blasphemous, And I want to assure you that I'm not asking it because that's what I truly believe. It's an exercise in thinking. But it is a thought that is reflected in our Jewish texts. I did not make this up, I got it from our texts. It seems like so many of our texts say that God is omnibenevolent, but actually there are many competing ideas about God in Jewish texts. For example, Maimonides said in the Guide for the Perplexed that while God is indeed our creator and does exist, the creation story in Genesis is actually a metaphor. And yet our early rabbis wanted to take it a little more literally and insisted on finding answers for things. And so they created a very interesting midrash in Genesis Rabbah having to do with God and perfection. After the sixth day of creation, it says in Genesis, which we'll read tomorrow, Vayach Elohim et kol asher asa v'hineh tov me'od. And Hashem saw all that Hashem made. And behold, it was very good. And of course it was good. God made it. Surely everything designed by Hashem is good. It was only after Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil that God's creations were not perfect. That's what we're taught. But Bereshit Rabbah tells us that this is not the case. Rabbi Abahu says that the Torah said that God actually created many worlds before ours, many worlds, and that these other worlds that were before ours, God did not find them to be so good. Rabbi Abahu says that the worlds before us were not so good, and Rabbi Pinchas elaborates saying that the reason our world is still here is because God found our world, compared to those worlds, to be very good. And all the worlds that were not good, God destroyed. Bereshit Rabbah reminds me of Kihine Kachomer, which we read on the High Holy Days. It talks about God as if God is this artist or a potter. If God is the most skilled potter that ever was, then it isn't unreasonable to imagine that maybe God is a perfectionist, even self-critical, and that only the very best work makes the cut. Maybe we know some very talented people who are highly critical of themselves because they know that what they make can be so excellent. Anything less than perfect, they start over. The story of God destroying other worlds is not the one that we're meant to believe, but it illustrates an important point, which is that we often inherit traits from our parents or extended family members. And if all humans are descended from God, then how can we demand perfection of ourselves when even our Creator makes mistakes? For to imagine for a moment that God might make mistakes, then there is an actual bigger lesson to be learned here, which is that if God, an extraordinarily talented creator, the best that there ever was and ever will be, might have been so hypercritical that he was, or she was, or even they were, depending on your pronoun choice, would be determined to see the flaws even in their great works, then God would never have a moment of peace. Could God ever accept that some things can be beautiful despite their flaws? Would God ever want to nurture a creation like that? A very close reading of the text in Genesis 1 suggests that this is so. Because even before Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it's quite possible, according to Genesis 1, that the only thing about the world that was not perfect prior to the Garden of Eden was us. You see, almost every day Hashem said, and it was good. On the sixth day, when humans were created, it split into two sections. First, the animals were created, then us. That was the sixth day. And in two places on day 6, it says that it was good. Second one is very good. It says very good, and that is the one after humans. After humans were created, God only said it was good once. And God actually wasn't talking about humans being good, believe it or not. It said all that God created. God looked at all that God had created, the last thing having been humans, and saw that it was very good. It was the totality of the creation that was very good. Humans by themselves were never mentioned as good. And this doesn't mean that we're not good. Humans are good. At least on the whole, we can be excellent. but we're not perfect. And if we want to use the metaphor from Bereshit Rabbah, then perhaps if we're not a perfect creation, then why didn't God destroy the world again and start over until we were perfect? Perhaps it's because God realized that when you demand perfection at every waking moment, you will never be satisfied. Even the best designs can be improved. But if that's what you want to do with your time, the work never stops. You have no time to enjoy yourself, no day of rest, no seventh day, no Shabbat. At some point, good enough is good enough, and good enough can be great. And so God had Shabbat, day 7. Although in the next week's Parshat Noach, God does somewhat destroy the world, it is not a total destruction. It's only a partial reset. Many living things died, but the earth stayed the same. The sun, moon, and stars, that stayed the same. Many humans and animals were still there. And so God didn't want to start all the way over. And I'm not saying that I know what God was thinking, because how can we? But I do believe when you read the text very closely, it says a lot of stuff that makes you wonder just how good was creation. Very, very good. Compared to what? Makes you wonder what else might have been. And so I asked again, as we begin our Torah anew, why did they make the Torah so hard to read? It's because we're meant to mess up. The opening chapter says that we are made in God's image, B'Tselem Elohim, and if parts of us are a reflection of Hashem, and we take these lessons to heart, to strive for the best, but to see the beauty of it, even when we don't get exactly perfection, then that can be godly, perhaps. It's best summed up in a saying that is an English saying, but seems to echo the 4th day of creation. Shoot for the moon. And even if you miss, you'll land amongst the stars. It's not perfection, but it can be very good. Vehine tov me'od. Shabbat shalom. We are going to turn now in our